Nyama 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 ya kuku. Few things in life taste better than a piece of crispy fried chicken. I will take a bite, but you know, lipstick. In that vein, before we delve into matters budget and I lose my appetite, let's sink our teeth into matters food safety. Monday having been the World Food Safety Day. And for the next hour and a half, we'll have a conversation on why it matters how we source our meat. In addition to yourself, I'm also joined by Dr. Victor Yamo, Farming Campaigns Manager, World Animal Protection, Dr. Joyce Thayer from the Directorate of Veterinary Services, and Jima Toza, MD Kenchik. The hashtag tonight is Food Safety KE, and the handles are at NTV Kenya, at Obarrows, and those of our panelists will be shared with you on our screen. Oh, why not? Okay. While I chew, Victor, Dr. Yam, will start with you. Why is animal welfare important to food safety?
Yeah, thank you. Only for that question. Animal welfare is important for food safety because how we treat an animal ultimately has an impact on the quality of product that comes out through the value chain. So it's important to look at it from that perspective, because if we mishandle the animal, there are certain things that will happen to that animal, which then has an impact on the product that comes out of that animal, whether it's milk, whether it's meat, whether it's eggs. Hence the reason why we look at food safety across the whole value chain, from the farm all the way to the plate. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Dr. Yamo. Joyce, I'll come to you now. You work in the Directorate of Veterinary Services. Why is animal welfare important to food safety?
Animal welfare is important to food safety. The reason being, the animal, if it is treated well, it will grow well, it will produce a good product, and it will be comfortable to live the way it was created by God to do.
All right, Jim, I'll come to you as the MD of Kenchik. Why indeed is animal welfare important to food safety?
Thank you, Carol. Well, we find at Kenchik that understanding that how a bird is produced and the welfare standards of that bird really makes a big difference to the quality of the food that it produces. We put a huge amount of emphasis about ensuring that our livestock are looked after, they're fed properly, they're watered properly, they've got a good environment to grow in. And what we've recognised, very straightforward, is if they are given the right conditions, that bird thrives, it grows properly, there's low mortality, there's zero disease, and we're producing a healthy bird. It doesn't need antibiotics, and it's fit and safe for human consumption.
Okay, so there is a report that was a result of a study released by World Animal Protection. Dr. Yamo, you'll testify to that. And it looked at the state of, I think it was pork and chicken on supermarket shelves, or deep freeze as it were. So, Jim, how confident should I be when I pick up meat products from Kenchik in the supermarket when the report showed that there were cases of bacterial contamination? How do you ensure that that is not the case with your products?
Thank you, Carol. Yes, I'm very much aware of the report. I think I'd like to go back to what we do at Kenchik. We've run a policy called, or a model called Farm to Fork, which we've been engaged with for the last sort of 12 years. And this really is about how we produce our product. We're in a position that we can effectively trace every single cut of meat and every chick right the way back to its grandparent, who laid the first egg, produced the parent, and how we produce the product all the way through. We've got systems and processes. We document every single stage. And we're audited by overseas as well as the local Department of Veterinary Services to ensure that we stick and adhere to the highest global standard. Once we've taken our product, and it's either a day-old chick, which means we've got a great product which the farmer can take and hopefully will grow on and thrive because it's fit and healthy. But if we take our cuts of meat We then go through the processing chain. They're taken into our slaughtering process. We are audited by the likes of KFC, which is a global audit chain, which sets the standard. Our factory is actually FSSC 22000, which is another global food production standard accreditation. And those really set the standard for us. So we know that the food we produce, it's safe to eat, it can be trusted, a trusted source. And the consumers can, they can eat it with great confidence.
All right, Victor, I'll come back to you now. Jim tells us you can trace the origins of their chicken all the way back to the grandparents. Is that the norm or the exception when we look at the Kenyan market?
Thank you, Olive. I think from my experience, having worked in the industry for quite some while, is that various organizations or businesses are at various levels. Essentially, the important thing is what Jim is saying, the traceability through that system, whether it's chickens, whether it's beef or pork or whatever, or milk, because that's the critical thing. In the last 2 or 3 years, when we've worked closely with supermarkets and with producers and even with the consumers, the critical thing that is coming out is that there are various standards and people are beginning to get there. Consumers are beginning to ask the hard questions, which is driving producers to do the right, retailers to do the right thing, and retailers then are beginning to develop in their own systems, their own internal control mechanisms to ensure that whatever they buy and get onto the supermarket shelf or onto the fast food restaurant shelf is something that is wholesome. And then add the layer that there are people in government that vigorously monitor that system, and there are regulations around some of these products and how they should be handled, then I would say we are in a good place in terms of being as a country, but there's still work to be done. And hence the reason why, as World Animal Protection, we continue working with producers, retailers, government to drive that process.
Okay. Dr. Thaya, I'd like to bring you in at that point. When we're looking to export to the EU, we had to meet certain stringent standards. Do we have similar standards when it comes to supplying our supermarkets, for instance?
Yes, the reason why it would seem that I apply higher standards or stricter standards when exporting, because that is a market demand. But we do have laws and regulations in the country that will ensure safety. The implementation at some level, particularly the lower levels, may be low, but the government has put in place their laws, their regulations that have been put in place to ensure that food is safe from farm to fork. But there is a lot that needs to be done for everybody along the chain, the producers of the products, the people who are trading with the product. It is important for all of us to work together to ensure that food is safe. But at regulation level, there are laws in place, but the implementation of it may be wanting because of the understanding along the actors of the value chain. Okay,
so basically, if I'm understanding you correctly, the regulations are there. Perhaps where we experience challenges is implementation. And Victor, the last time I hosted you, we were discussing antimicrobial resistance. Yeah. The misuse of antibiotics in animal husbandry, when you're rearing your animals. So does that remain a major concern for you?
That is one of the major concerns for us, and not only us, but a global concern. That's why there's a global action plan around reduction of antimicrobial resistance, and all of it is tied to animal welfare. I think Jim has alluded to certain things that we need to be looking at in terms of then managing that process, how we feed the animal. If the animal is fed well with good quality food that meets its requirements, then that animal will not get sick, so you don't need to treat it. If we have a clean environment that is hygienic, the hygiene standards are at a certain beyond acceptable standards, then again the animal does not get sick and we don't need to treat it. However, because of what we found in our experience is that because of poor welfare, farmers then have learned the art that if I did give antibiotics at low dose level, then I manage that process. The animal doesn't get sick, but what we're doing is we're creating another problem, because now we have antibiotics in the system. We have antibiotics that is leading to generation of superbugs, which is what the report was about. Superbugs are basically bacteria that are resistant to 3 or 4 or more antibiotics. So essentially, that's the connection that we're looking at. The other interesting thing, just to then pitch it up there, is the fact that 75% of antibiotics produced globally is actually used in farm animals. And essentially it is in dairy, it is in chickens, and it is in pigs, which are the big producers. So part of what we are saying as an organization is that between 40 and 80% of that antibiotic is unnecessary. And it's good that we have in Jim on the set today, because he then can confirm that even here locally, we're able to produce animals, grow chickens without use of antibiotics. All we need to do is ensure that we have good quality feed, we have clean water that goes into the production system, we have a good environment that is well ventilated, there is no any challenges in terms of disease in that environment, then we vaccinate properly, and essentially then you're able to grow chickens. I have grown layers in this country for 1.5 years without use of antibiotics, and that's what we're trying to drive farmers to. Thank you.
1.5 years, you haven't used antibiotics at all?
At all, because it's all about management. If you do the right things, the animal then responds positively. If you have stressors, and stressors can be anything. One of the things I usually say, I've just come from a farmers meeting earlier today, and I told farmers, you know what, if you can't drink the water that you're giving the animals, then that water should not be in the production system. We have this mentality that the animal can take anything. If it's rotten maize, we hear in certain situations where maize rot in silos, we quickly say it should be given for feed production. The reality is that some of those animals, chickens for instance, are more sensitive to mycotoxins, which is in that maize, than human beings. The same applies to dogs. So by the time dogs are dying of eating grain that has mycotoxin in their feed, we have a problem. By the time the human beings are getting it, the animals will have died. Then remember that in that production system, if the animal is not fed well, especially if you're looking at mycotoxins, then again, what you're doing is you're then causing what you call immune suppression. Mycotoxins suppress the immunity of the animal, which then means it is going to get to disease at certain points, which then needs to be antibiotics to be introduced. But I think in terms of food safety, the more important thing is that anything that you give that animal, Olive, ultimately ends up on your table. If you give antibiotics to that animal, the animal will concentrate it in the muscle, will concentrate it in milk, will concentrate it in eggs, and that ends up on your table. So essentially you'll be eating what you're avoiding, essentially still goes, the animal just concentrates it and puts it back on the table for you. And those are some of the things you're looking at in terms of safe food for a healthy tomorrow.
Okay, so before I move on to other threats to food safety where animal welfare is concerned, Jim, Victor mentioned you. He says he hasn't used antibiotics in rearing his layers for 1.5 years. What's the situation at Kenchik where antibiotics are concerned and on the issue of antimicrobial resistance?
Thank you, Olive, and thank you, Victor. I completely endorse what you said and concur. You know, Kenchik, you know, if you take our breeding operations, we just haven't used antibiotics for many, many years. I think the biggest concern, as he's rightly said, is in the terminal product, which could be a poultry or pigs or milk, etc. We have a non-use of antibiotic policy, and that's been going for a number of years. I think it's very critical to say that from time to time, antibiotics may need to be used. It's the same with humans, etc. From time to time, there will be a problem. If that is the case, then the problem has to be identified, and we've got many veterinary surgeons who work for us. They will visit a farm and they will make a very informed decision on what needs to be done. It may just be vitamins, but in some circumstances you may have to administer. That has to be prescribed. The product has to be correct, fit for animal, and the right amount used. But to put it quite frankly, we're really not scared of the antibiotic story because we just don't use them.
All right. Dr. Thai, I'd like to bring you in at that point. Jim brought in a very interesting word, and that is prescribed. And we had Victor telling us that Victor, I think you said 40 to 80% of the antibiotics that are being used are not necessary where livestock is concerned. You said pigs, chicken, and cows consume about over 70%, I think you said 75% of the antibiotics produced globally.
Yep. Okay.
So, Dr. Thaya, are there regulations? How do you monitor the use of these antibiotics as a ministry?
One of the things that we need to understand is, and as Victor has said, the use of antibiotics comes because the animal gets sick, and in some instances people will abuse, I would say, antibiotics, trying to control an assumed disease or hoping that the disease will not come. So as Victor said, these are unnecessary. They shouldn't be used. If the farm is clean, then you don't need to use antibiotics. However, there are regulations that have been set for the use of antibiotics. The antibiotics that should only be used on prescription. There are those that may be used over the counter, but those are limited. There are also regulations which control who should administer or who should prescribe these antibiotics. Not everybody, because they are in the animal science or they are in the animal health industry, should use those. The laws are clear who should use what antibiotics and when they should be used. Also, the antibiotics themselves from the manufacturer, there is clear indication of how it should be used, when it should be used, in what quantities it should be used. So when people abuse antibiotics, use them when they should not be used, how they should not be used, then that becomes a problem. And it becomes a problem on two ways. One, when you use antibiotics, the issue of resistance comes in when you use them wrongly. Number two, those antibiotics will be in foods. And when they are in foods, there are people who maybe react to one or two, they are sensitive. So you may get allergies when there are residues of those antibiotics in foods, and that becomes a human health problem.
Okay.
Thank you.
And based off of your own answer, you say there are those who use these antibiotics sort of like to preempt infection or disease or sickness where the animals are concerned. So who then makes sure that the agrovets are adhering to said regulations?
There is a regulatory board, the Kenya Veterinary Board, which regulates the practice of veterinary service in Kenya. They monitor the use, they monitor the practice itself, they monitor even how the drugs are handled. Because again, if they are not handled right, if you keep it in temperatures that it ought not to be kept, you abuse it, and when you use it, it will not be effective, but it only causes a problem both to the human beings and to the animals. So there is a regulatory body that is charged with that responsibility.
Dr. Yamo, I'll put you on the spot a little bit. Do you feel that that regulatory body is doing enough?
Yes, and I think maybe just to add to what Dr. Thaya said, beyond the regulatory body, the Kenya Veterinary Board that looks at the practitioners, the vets, the vet surgeons and the vet paraprofessionals, there is also the Veterinary Medicines Directorate that actually registers, licenses and monitors how the antibiotics are being used, and if you want to import any, you need to then get authority from them. I think it's critical then to understand that there might be limitations, especially if you look at VMD, which is a relatively new body. I think it's barely 5 years old. Previously, all medications were handled by the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, but then at that point there was challenges because we then discovered that, I'm sure all of you saw that many years ago, that some of the antibiotics for use in veterinary were found in hardwares. And so that's part of the reason why, as the veterinary surgeons, we then pushed through Parliament for creation of a Veterinary Medicines Directorate, which is then handling some of those things, ensuring that the right product, it is mixed in the right way, wherever it's coming from, it is manufactured under good manufacturing practice, and then beyond that, regulating the agrovets that are going to then handle those products. But then the Kenya Veterinary Board then also ensures that the practitioner is, number one, competent and able to handle those products effectively, and two, that the way they are handling and storing them is done well. There is some work to be done, but I think we are in a better place than we were 5-10 years ago.
All right. So before I get to Jim, perhaps, Victor, is that the only concern where the raising of these animals is concerned and our food safety is concerned? Are antibiotics the only issue? Antibiotics
is not the only issue, Olive. There are other things that we need to look at, and they all end up tied up to how we then handle the product from farm to fork, if I can borrow Jim's analogy there, or what they've been good at doing. Let's look at it from number one. I just talked about feeding the animal. And I gave you a good example of mycotoxins, which are essentially are toxins that come from fungus when the maize is not handled properly. And you see, that's the connection. It's not just about the animal, it's about a whole system. So for us as an organization, we talk about food system. And food systems look at how foods interact. So the problem could be in agriculture where the maize storage is wrong or has a challenge, but it's ultimately impacting on milk and eggs, and that connection needs to be looked at. So that's one level. The second level is then the other chemicals that we need to be looking at are things like pesticides. If I'm growing animals around where the environment has been contaminated with pesticides, and I think there's enough data looking at waterways. I think last year or the other year there was a whole report about what was found in Nairobi River at certain levels. If the animal is consuming that water, then it's collecting pesticide, it's collecting all manner of chemicals that ends up being concentrated in the animal's body. So that's one level of chemicals. The next level is what I'd call pathogens or bacteria, or which cause disease. And what then happens is that if our transportation system is wrong, then we end up with animals having challenges. We've just been doing a study around one of the slaughterhouses around Nairobi, and we find that animals are being brought to the slaughterhouse, pigs in this case, which are tied behind motorbikes. You're finding chickens being transported hanging on motorbike handlebars. Those animals are going through stress. That's one. So stress then means that they will, the organisms that could be normal will end up proliferating and causing a disease in that, or contaminating the product. That's one level. The other level is when they're being transported in the wrong way, you end up with injuries. So you find these wounds. You find that because it was tied with a bladder or something behind a motorbike, it has got injuries, it has broken its leg. One, that becomes a foresight for bacterial contamination, which then ends up in the meat once the animal is slaughtered. That's another level. And two, the same animal then has challenges because what has been contaminated must be condemned at the processing plant. So you find that they are either downgraded or they are ultimately condemned, and that is lost to the farmer. So you see, it's, if you look at it from a food safety, there are bacteria coming into that, and maybe that's what we were looking at when we were talking about bacterial contaminants. And then when we move into the kitchen, how then do we handle the products? Okay. You have meats, you have vegetables. There's possibilities of cross-contamination. So there's a whole lot. That's why the farm-to-fork concept is very critical. Okay, so before we get to the kitchen, and that progression, Jim, so Victor tells us that animals too are susceptible to stress, and the stress makes them susceptible to infection. But what are some of the biggest challenges you experience at the farm stage in terms of ensuring food safety? Perhaps what's your biggest cost?
Well, thank you, Olive, and thank you, Victor. Yeah. You know what we've talked about in the Farm to Fork program, but you know, Farm to Fork is a globally accepted way of doing things. It does lay a cost into the business. There's a huge amount of training of our staff to understand that good animal practice and husbandry really impacts upon the production and the profitability, obviously, of the business. And also from a point of view that, you know, we have a specific ISO lab which really tests all of our products on a weekly basis. We've just talked about feed, we talked about water, we constantly do a check for bacterial load within all of our environments. That's tested, so we know that what we are doing in our processes is correct, and it's our sort of feedback mechanism. But we have layers of cost, and that there is cost in the business. I mean, we do know that Kenchik products, you know, are not the cheapest in the market, but the standards and the sort of the trust value that it brings forward is because there are elements we put into our business that ensure that that food is safe. I'm sure Victor understands that. All the way through from correct transportation of our day-old chicks in environmentally controlled trucks, how we collect and catch our birds to take to the slaughter plant, the environment in the slaughter plant, the cold chain of delivery services to the retailer, the consumer. Everything is monitored, everything is checked, everything is documented. It does put a cost into the business.
All right. So, Dr. Thayer, when we come back from the next break, I'd like you to tell us, as an ISO lead assessor, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Thayer?
No, you're not mistaken.
Sorry?
You're not mistaken.
I'm not mistaken. Good. Yes. Perhaps you could tell us what are some of the biggest challenges you find that producers encounter, and also where the most room for improvement lies. We had asked a question. The hashtag tonight, in case I forgot to mention it, is food safety KE. My Twitter handle is at @obarrows. At NTV Kenya, those of our panelists, as I mentioned earlier, have been shared together with their name tags. I don't know, let me ask my director, do we have some of that feedback? Okay, so we'll have that for you on the other side of this break.
Selena, don't get puzzled. She's my twin. I shine your toilet and I bathroom. So, is your bathroom clean?
Yes! Presenting the new Harpic bathroom cleaner. Compared to ordinary detergents, its thick formulation gives you superior cleaning and kills 99.9% of germs and viruses all around the bathroom.
Blue
for the toilet
and red
for the bathroom. Harpic bathroom and toilet cleaner cleans and kills 99.9% of germs and viruses.
With the Stay Soft refill, saving money is as easy as snip, pour, mix with water, and shake. Stay Soft refill. It's 2 liters of Stay Soft for up to 30% less.
The Kenya Film Commission is glad to announce the 4th edition of My Kenya, My Story mobile phone film competition. Various films have been shortlisted for public voting. You are encouraged to watch and vote for your favorite short film, which will be showcased on the Kenya Film Commission's YouTube page. Join us on the 18th of June as we announce the winner of the 4th edition of My Kenya, My Story. Kenya Film Commission. Film Kenya, Capture Africa.
Thank you for staying with us on NTV. And on this leadership forum, we are looking at matters food safety and how animal welfare ties into that. So we had asked a question online, and that was, what do you look at when you're buying meat to eat? We have an M4J who says the area the meat is being sold. Rashid Kato says the nutritional value and the quality of the meat. Martin Odor says he looks at the price of the meat and the kind of animal. We have Aris who says fresh. He says he buys his meat fresh from the slaughterhouse and should and if it's a goat, there should be evidence of skin at the knee. And let's see, Oludo Joseph says most times it's whether it weighs the right weight I paid for. He says most butcheries have governed, I guess, tinkered or interfered with their scales. We have Matthew Barra who says the freshness attracted by flies, or okay, I guess he looks at whether it's attracting flies or not. We have Judy who says the source of the meat. Godfred, yes, who says he looks at the mercury content. How do you gauge the mercury content at the butcher? I'm curious. And Aoko Otieno says, I don't buy meat from the supermarket. Nyama mzuri ile unaona na nzi ikikaribia kwa butcher. Okay, so they go to the butcher and if they see flies on the meat, then they're fine. They will buy that meat. All right, Dr. Thaya, there's a question I posed to you before we went on break, and that is, when you're carrying out assessment for ISO certification, what are some of the biggest issues you come across?
The issues that we come across, not even just ISO certification, because there is very little of that in the country now, but along the chain, you know, GIM is one of a kind, because most of our poultry does not come from Kenchik. It comes from the small-scale farmers. And the challenges that Jim is talking about are real to the small-scale farmer, because that hygiene, so that it will enable them not to use antibiotics, may not be there. That hygiene of carrying these animals, like Victor was talking about before we went on break, that they are not carried properly. So at the farm, many farmers, and this conversation should be more frequent, should ensure that their farms are clean no matter how small they are, they should be clean. Number two, that they should only treat animals after the doctor has looked at the animal and has confirmed the animal is sick and has confirmed that the animal needs to be treated. Number three, the stressors around the animal, they give the food properly, they give water, clean water, like Victor said, they give it properly. And this way, these are the challenges that we find. So ISO certification is a long way away from where we are as a country, but we have other standards that can be used by the small scale people. But the most important and critical is clean farms. Clean farms and the small scale farm. You don't allow anybody and everybody to visit your chicken or your pigs, because these people will come with all sorts of problems, and this is what might increase the risk or the need to use these antibiotics. So clean farm, not allowing everybody to come into your farm, clean feed, clean water, the housing has to be good, proper aeration, proper temperature, because these are the stressors that will cause these animals to get sick and will cause probably the use of more drugs and the use of, if you don't control the other pests, the ticks, the fleas, then this will cause stress to the animals, will reduce the immunity, and will cause the use of more antibiotics. So animal welfare is a big deal when it comes to food safety.
Okay, so Victor, there's a good point that has been raised by Dr. Athaya, and I'm seeing even in the feedback that we're receiving, a lot of people are saying they don't have the same resources as Kenchik. They can't all afford cold storage or cold trucks to transport their chicken from the farm to the supermarket, perhaps, or wherever they sell their chicken. Or, you know, they're saying they don't necessarily have the money to attain the same level that Kenchik has done. What do you say to them?
I think we start where you are. Rome was not built in a day. And essentially what I'm trying to say, Joyce has mentioned a few of those critical things that you need to look at. But I just want to start from the very basic one. How do you build your chicken house? Because there's a standard chicken house. I travel across this country, and some of the things we call chicken houses are not chicken houses. Since I've grown old, my son has a small hut. He's moved into a bigger house. The hut is converted into a chicken house. That's not a chicken house. There's a standard chicken house which has certain dimensions that you can ask for the extension people to look at. Once you have the proper chicken house and you have a proper, the next level is how then do you ensure that it is clean, hygiene. And I think COVID is really helping us. People are beginning to understand that you need to wash the house, you need to have clean air, you need to have enough stock, stocking density must be correct, because those are the critical things. If you put too many chickens, because sometimes farmers think that the more chickens, the better, and the more product. But essentially then you are negatively impacting on the animals. Too many chickens, you end up with disease because of the space that you're giving them. They'll end up hurting each other. They will not have enough space to grow into. So instead of growing, as Jim would say, in 5 weeks, you end up your chickens growing in 6, 7 weeks, which then is a cost of production. So it's the little things that we need to look at. But I want to also start by saying that around the farm, and I think we have challenges with farming, and I think as a country we need to have that conversation. If I can't even have a farm that I can fence, then I'm beginning to have challenges with biosecurity. Because the fence is the first line of defense to ensure that the hygiene, to ensure that visitors are not getting there, to ensure that nobody gets too close. If you go to Jim's farms, you might end up taking 5 showers to get into a chicken house, because there's a shower at the gate, there's a shower at the office, there's a shower at the door of the chicken house. And those are things farmers need to look at critically, because that's where the process starts. If you are easy and lax in terms of managing disease and biosecurity, it simply means that you are not going to be able to operate at international standards, because anybody then goes in. The other critical and big thing, I think Joyce has just forgotten to talk about it, is our management of rodents. A lot of our chicken houses have rats, and a lot of our chicken houses have wild birds. It's very simple processes. Rats, you buy baits, you ensure that the feed store is not within the chicken house, and that way then you manage processes. Those rats, wild birds, and human beings are the biggest threat to your poultry business and the biggest threat to your pig business, because those are the people who bring disease. If you can just manage that one, 50% of your problems are sorted. And then the next level is then just feeding. And I think the challenge with feeding is farmers are trying to cut down costs And so they mix other things, they call them feeds. You give them good quality feeds, they add other things. They don't feed at the right interval, so the animal does not grow at the rate it's supposed to grow. And all these things affect the welfare of that animal. And essentially then you're ending up with animals that are not producing optimally, animals that are having challenges with the disease because they are immunosuppressed. They have challenges with that process. And then you end up with a system that simply doesn't work. And that's where Kenyans have become very innovative, because they've discovered that if I just put slightly some antibiotics, then I mask the disease. If they're not putting antibiotics, and I've heard people talking about flies, what are they looking at? We then have situations where people then add certain chemicals to preserve. We had certain chemicals to preserve milk. We had certain chemicals to preserve meat. And that then brings another layer of problems from a food safety perspective. And also all these things work together. And I think farmers should start appreciating that there's nothing done in isolation. You do not have to be as big as Kenchik. I know of small-scale farmers who are doing the right thing and are having very good production and productivity. But the challenge is that some of us want to cut corners. And so these are then what then gives us challenges in our production system. And are things that we need to talk about. And I think part of it is then challenges which I think we need to direct to the right places. The county governments need to have recruit more extension staff, because that message has to go through. A program like this can only reach X number of people. But at the ground level, when the farmer needs the information, who does it turn to? I think our biggest challenge is farmers are talking to each other. So if I have a disease problem because County X doesn't have enough vet surgeons or vet paraprofessionals, you ask your neighbor, so yesterday I had this green diarrhea, what do I do? And Olive, I would like to challenge you, go into any of these farmers groups on Facebook or on WhatsApp. In the morning, the farmer asks, oh, I have greenish diarrhea, what do I do? And before you know it, you have all manner of, every farmer is prescribing a drug. And that's where the problem starts. Instead of asking what is the problem, making proper diagnosis. And I think it behoves this country to start saying, we need veterinary surgeons, we need veterinary paraprofessionals. I think our mistake has been, for far too long, we have gone to curative medicine. So we employ doctors who cure the problem. But we fail to remember that prevention is better than cure. And the people who can prevent that process are the vet surgeons and the vet paraprofessionals, the people who need to be with the animal so that the animal is not giving you a problem. By the time you're having aflatoxins on the meat and people are consuming that meat, then you're having a totally different challenge. Maybe that's why our cancer levels are high, because we are consuming aflatoxins that is coming through the system. Maybe we need to then employ more vets to manage that process at that level. And I think those are the little things that we need to do as a country. And I think we need to start refocusing and saying, where is the critical things that we need to be doing? Who is giving the extension information? Who is working with the farmer? Have the farmers been left to their own devices? And those are the challenges that we're looking at.
Well, you're clearly very passionate about these issues. Dr. Thaya, I hope you're taking notes, especially on the issue of extension services. I'd like you to weigh in on that. So, Jim, you run a rather large enterprise. What advice do you have for the smaller scale farmer?
Thank you, Olive. Just listening to what to Dr. Yamo said then, I think we have to just understand also that there are a huge amount of farmers that are doing exactly the right job out there. They are adhering to the standards of welfare, they're feeding great quality food, they've got good quality water, and they understand the principles of good husbandry and management. And they should feel quite happy about that. And maybe some of the issues which you alluded to, and I think it's coming on the hashtag about what's actually happening and about how they can market their product, that's a totally different story here today. We're talking about food safety. I mean, we as Kenchik, for instance, employ a huge number of technical staff, veterinaries, who offer extension services to those farmers to help them build their businesses and adhere to the sort of standards that we put in place around welfare and production. I think we've still got a long way to go. There's a huge amount of opportunity. Now, we have the internet today, and we're a very tech-savvy country. There is a huge amount of knowledge and know-how to be found on there, and not listening to maybe some anecdotal stories of what has worked from somebody else. Kenchick is more than happy to be able to offer our services. I think we've got the great opportunity now to build upon a strong framework working alongside the likes of the DVS, the Ministry of Health, and bodies like World Animal Protection. Because I know this industry here, and if we take it and look at it in a different direction, look at what we export out of this country: tea, coffee, fresh produce, flowers, avocados. We have been able to stick to global and adhere to global and build global standards of production. Why can't we do it in the animal sector? Of course we can. There needs to be stronger collaboration. And I think you talked about extension officers. I do think the private sector, like Kenchick as well, have a lot more that we can do to help build a strong union of good food safety production.
So do you produce all your own chicken, or do you source some of it from smaller scale farmers?
Okay, that's a great question. You know, I think a really good thing is to go back to 1984 when Kenchick first was incepted. It was incepted in order to grow and develop the poultry industry, to provide good, fresh, wholesome protein, to grow food security, and also build livelihoods for farmers. Still today, only roughly 30% of our production of day-old chicks for broilers, for instance, are actually utilised and grown in our own operations and with contract farmers, which I'll come to. 70% of those products go actually to small, medium-scale farmers out there, as well as layer chicks. We grow meat to be processed ourselves within our own operations. We also have a contract farming operation, where we have farmers within the environs of Nairobi and close to our processing plant. And they actually constitute about 60% of our total production. So yes, we do. We have contracted growers who we work very closely with in order to ensure that there's a livelihood for them, but also that we are providing great, wholesome, nutritious, farm-to-fork, audited products.
Okay, so do you visit?
I think just to add on to that, there is opportunity still. We're aware of a recent refurbishment of a processing plant further north in the Rift Valley, and I think there is great opportunity for local processing opportunities to take place, where they can aggregate local farmers to bring in product to be produced throughout a set system, ISO certified, and with the opportunity of then supplying local retail and consumers. There is that model has happened elsewhere in the world. There's no reason why it can't happen here.
So how do you ensure the quality of the poultry products that they supply?
How would they?
How do you ensure the quality of what they supply to you? Your contracted farmers.
Exactly the same what I've just talked about. On the Farm to Fork programme, it encompasses everything which we do. Not only what I say within our breeding operations, which supplies the products coming into our processing, exactly the same standards are adhered to within our own contract farming operation. They're audited. We have technical service team that visit regularly, take things like swabs, test the water. If there are any form of issues, we have, as I said, our laboratory back in our main office there, where we'll bring in birds that may show some form of symptom. We can test. We can do blood agglutination tests. We can test for all forms of diseases, and then we can give the feedback to the farmer. And make a very profiled decision on what should happen. So they fall under our Farm to Fork programme, exactly the same as we do within our in-house operations. Okay. There is no difference whatsoever.
All right. Dr. Thayer, when you were speaking about the use of antibiotics earlier, you talked about how if your animal falls sick, get professional advice, but then not everybody has access to that professional advice, and the question of extension officers has been raised by Victor. What say you?
It is actually a challenge of getting enough animal health practitioners in the country, The governments have very few, but there are also other private practitioners out there who can also be able to serve the farmer. The only important thing, one, is to make sure that these are people who are licensed by the board. These are people who, and they can be able to show you, they have the identification card to show that they are registered by the board and they are in good repute by the regulator. Number two, it is governments, particularly the county governments, also to work with the private sector to ensure that the farmers in their counties get the services that they require. So the government has a lot, there's a need to invest a lot in animal health, both by the government and the industry as well. Like what Jim is talking about, they are supporting the industry. There are many other industry players out there who can also support the industry, so that that small-scale farmer who is having 100, 200 animals can be able to access. But there are practitioners out there. The only important thing, and the main thing, is for that farmer to ensure that the person who is attending to your animals is registered and licensed by the board, because there could be a lot of other people out there who are doing quack work, but you need to ask for that identification that this person is registered by the board. And you can also be able to report malpractice, which is allowed by the board. If you think that the service provider who is offering you services for your animals is not doing the right thing, the board allows for you to report any malpractice, and the board will be able to take action on that.
Dr. Yamo, Dr. Thayer has raised the issue of the number of qualified practitioners in this space. How would you propose we tackle that challenge?
I think the issue is not numbers. I happen to have been a previous Kenya Veterinary Board chairman, and one of the things I know is that we have adequate number of veterinary paraprofessionals. At the last count, I think we have about 10,000 veterinary paraprofessionals. We might need more, but the challenge is that they are not gainfully employed. So we have very good practitioners who could do certain things and would do their work properly, but unfortunately, the government, county governments would prefer to recruit a vet to recruit a medic, for that matter, instead of that. So that's one level. So I think what we simply need to do is to distribute some of these things and look at possibilities and ways in which that we can manage that. The second level is that we then need to continuously upgrade them. And there's a requirement for those vet paraprofessionals to do what is called continuous professional activity, which is to CPDs, to ensure that they are up. You know, industry is changing. When I joined the poultry industry back at some 20 odd years ago, it wasn't where it is today. So there's requirements that you continuously also engage and learn. And I think that's something that we need to be looking at. Then, as Jim has said, we need to work collaboratively. It's not just about the animal health, but it's also about the feeding aspect. So who are our feed millers? What standards are they meeting? Who are bringing in products and what standards are they bringing? Are they having technical people to backstop for the products that they're bringing in? If it's vaccines, who is then backstopping for those vaccines? If it is feed, if there's a challenge in feeds and there's been challenges around that, who then is backstopping? So it's the whole industry then needs to work together to identify certain things. So my challenge to the poultry industry is that we need to come together, or the pig industry, and start driving local industry standards. And I think you started off by asking Joyce about certain standards. Question is, and as an organization, we've even been looking for standards. What are the standards of moving, of purchasing? If a supermarket wants to purchase, do they then have to do their own internal standards, or there are certain standards they have to look at? What is suggested is that there are certain organizations like the World Organization for Animal Health will give you certain suggestions of standards, but you as a country then need to domesticate those standards, so that when you're saying this is what we do, then you have very clear standards. I know in the beginning of the program, if you look at the Kenchik website, they talk about meeting European standards. Why then are they struggling to meet European standards when they are an African operation producing in Africa? Are there no African standards they should be looking at? So those are some of the things that we need to discuss as an industry, and then agree this is the way forward and how we are going to tackle that holistically. There's a role for county government, There's a role for national government, there's a role for producers, there's a role for retailers, and last but not least, there's a role for consumers. If you do not ask the right questions or push industry to do the right thing, or retailers to do the right thing, then you end up with a challenge in the product that comes to you.
Okay.
And that's why I think just to conclude, you asked about why is there more international standards are slightly higher than the African standards or the local standards. Those are some of the things that are driving these things, Olive.
Okay, and we'll get to the consumer. And Jim, at a certain point, I'll ask what you look for when you're buying your chicken, if you buy your chicken. But on the point that was raised by Victor, when you supply to retailers, supermarkets, for instance, do they have certain requirements that they mandate you to meet?
Sorry, Oliver, it went a bit quiet there. Could you repeat it?
Yeah, my question is this. When you supply to retailers, supermarkets, for instance, do they have certain standards that they require you to meet?
Well, we obviously supply across the whole retail and sort of fast food restaurant side. I think from the international chains, and I'll talk sort of on the restaurant side, the likes of KFC and Java and people like Art Cafe who we use, who supply, yes, they do look for standards, and they do audit us thoroughly. Certainly with some of those standards, they're at global levels. I would say there's a long way to go within the retail trade. I think the grocery trade, if you look at it globally, specifically within Europe, they are very keen on their standards and their audits. And I would say their collaboration and partnership with the supplier. We're not quite there yet. We have great relationships with all of the major retail outlets in the country, but we would implore them to build and lift their standards as well, and welcome them thoroughly to come and audit us. I think there's a great opportunity of the producer, the retailer, the consumer, the other bodies which we've just mentioned or alluded to come together and create, as Dr. Yamo said, you know, a Kenyan standard, an African standard, which we can all feel happy to sign up to. There's a great opportunity and potential there.
All right. So when we come back from this break that's coming up next, I'll ask our panelists, because they're also consumers, what they look for when they go to the supermarket and buy meat or go to their butcher. Is it just flies? You know, they'll tell us after this break.
Fresh Fry Premium Cooking Oil now has a new look and an advanced spout and seal. Triple refined, zero cholesterol and natural vitamin E. Fresh Fry, always heart friendly. Now it's even more cooking friendly. Fresh Fry, the premium cooking oil for healthy living.
Kijani Ridge is Tatu City's premier neighborhood, offering a 1.5 acre fully serviced plot in a controlled development. The plots overlook a beautiful dam with natural green spaces. Kijani Ridge is a walking distance from Rover Pioneer and Crawford International Schools. Families are already moved in and more homes are under construction. Contact us for daily site visits and own your dream home with us.
I have to admit, I didn't like Sukuma Wiki when I was growing up, but now I've created a way to make Sukuma Wiki tastier and meatier. I simply add 2 Royco beef cubes and the end result is a rich, meaty flavor. And today, I have brought along my harshest food critics for a taste test. My kids.
More, please!
Royco beef cubes. Add 2 small cubes for a big, meaty taste.
Mama yao, angalia mikono yangu imeparara.
Ala, aibu gani mwenzangu? Kwani umekuwa ukitumia sabuni gani ya unga? Unahitaji sabuni na laini kwa mikono. Unaona Ariel mpya inayeyuka haraka na ni laini kwa mikono yako, huku ikiondoa madoa sugu.
Na mikono yangu ni laini. Na safi.
Happy anniversary.
Mbona hii mabati ya kina dad na mam bado inakaa mpya? Na hii nyumba imekuwa hapa for so many years. Na pia umelelewa hapa.
Wow, imagine hata nilikuwa sija notice. Rufus, wewe ni fundi wangu wa miaka mingi sana. Haya mabati yatadumu kweli? Huyu kijana nilimwambia anunue mabati ya Dumuzas.
Usibahatishe mabati. Hakikisha umeangalia alama za kudhibitisha Dumuzas halisi. Chagua Dumuzas, mabati inayodumu kudumu. Isitoshe, Dumuzas ndio mabati pekee inayokuja na warranty.
Sitaki tena kubahatisha.
This is NTV.
Tonight, Kenya's biggest budget yet, but not enough money to fund it. So make room for more debt.
We have scheduled a set of debt management operations to lower costs and risk in our public debt portfolio to improve on the country's debt sustainability indicators.
Treasury still betting on betting. Big Four still in the budget as BBI and Galana Kulalu are missing in action. What does Wanjiku think?
Budget haikutufurahisha sisi kama wananchi. Wamama wa mboga, wamama matunda wanalia sana.
And fighting the pandemic through the budget.
In order to facilitate further rollout of vaccines, to create herd immunity, we propose to allocate Kenya shilling 14.3 billion in the financial 2021-22.
But the pending bills are still a headache.
I direct government ministries, departments and agencies and the county governments to clear all their pending bills by 30th June 2021.
We tell you why this may be impossible, as well as why bread will not be any cheaper and what Wananchi feel about the budget. Also tonight, the judiciary cannot be under the presidency, so the president's orders are out of order. High Court rules executive order illegal, null and void. And the two former Chief Justices hit out at the president. Now his deputy is at it as clerics preach against the referendum plan.
We believe power donated by the people of Kenya, exercised by leaders, should be in accordance with the Constitution.
Did you know that in Kenya there are 5,000 registered savings and credit cooperative societies? 230 of the SACCOs operate front office service activities commonly known as FOSA. Vision Africa SACCO Limited, which has over 22,000 members, is among the SACCOs which are transforming lives in Kenya. It has branches in Gilgil, Naivasha, Molo and Nakuru.
The SACCO started in 2004 with 30 members. Our asset base has grown to have a billion.
Their members were able to use cooperative bank channels, ride on cooperative bank products such as SACCO personal checks, the SACCO link card.
They've been giving us services in terms of educating our members.
Hii kazi yangu nilianza na shilingi 50. Nikaweka kwa Vision Africa, nimejenga kwangu, nimenunua kisiagi.
Cooperative Bank is working with cooperatives to transform lives.
Mama yao, angalia mikono yangu imeparara.
Ala, aibu gani mwenzangu? Kwani umekuwa ukitumia sabuni gani ya unga? Unahitaji sabuni na laini kwa mikono. Unaona Ariel mpya inayeyuka haraka na ni laini kwa mikono yako, huku ikiondoa madoa sugu.
Na mikono yangu ni laini. Na safi.
Fashion design is my dream. Change your story, dream full steam. Yeah. For a brighter path, gotta get to class. Stop! Got to change my tissue. No more tissue issue. It can be jammy, leaky, smelly. Change your story, not your tissue. With always 3-in-1. Get triple protection. 1 locks leaks, 2 locks germs, 3 locks odor, 3-in-1 protection. No more tissue, dream full steam. From hallway to runway, my future, my glory. Let's all change our story. with always 3-in-1 protection available in day and night range.
You do your best out there. Let us do our best in here with the disinfecting power of Jik. Because Jik cleans and kills 99.9% of illness-causing germs in your home. Jik, your family's guardian against germs.
Thank you for staying with us on the Nation Leadership Forum. We are discussing matters of food safety and how animal welfare impacts that question. So before we went on break, I said I would be asking my panelists what they look for when they're buying meat, be it the supermarket, the butchers, and we had posed that same question online. Let's recap on what some of you had sent in, and then we'll look at some new feedback. Then we have M4J who says the area the meat is being sold. Next is Rashid Kato, who says the nutritional value and quality of meat. Martin Odor says the price of the meat and the kind of animal. Aris says he prefers to buy meat fresh from the slaughterhouse, and he said if it is a goat, there should be evidence of small skin at the knee. Let's take a look at the next tweet. Oludo says most times is whether it weighs the weight I paid for. Most butcheries have governed their scales. And we have Matthew Barra who says the freshness attracted by flies, which I guess he says means the meat is flavorful and does not, perhaps does not contain those chemicals that Dennis Okari told us about in his special red alert. All right, so Black Moses says, I was taught to check cleanliness of the meat retailer. If they carry themselves cleanly, I would have confidence. Daughter of Mumbi says, I only buy from Kenchik. Jim would be quite happy to hear that. Peter says, I consider my pocket. Dennis says, quantity and duration of stay. Kenduiwo says, the color of the meat. Victor, I'll start with you. What do you look for?
I thought you were going to start with the ladies, but it's okay. I essentially, since I've been around the meat industry, especially poultry, for quite a while, I know there are certain marks of standards. So if you go to a supermarket and you look at the package of that meat, you'll find a DVS mark, you'll find a Kenya Bureau of Standards mark, and then the other things that you can look at around that. So I look at that as a basis. If I'm going to buy meat in a butchery, I need to see the roller mark showing that the meat has actually been inspected by the team from the Director of Veterinary Services. But beyond that, then I look at certain things, aesthetics. Somebody has talked about where they keep the meat itself, the cleanliness. But I think the most important one for me is a relationship sort of thing. I have bought meat from the same butchery, I think, for the last 20 or so odd years. The same person, we have a discussion, I know where they get their meat, I have interrogated him long enough, he knows I had questions and being very technical. I can even see what is being displayed and I can ask questions around it. So essentially, that's my sort of way of buying meat.
Okay. Dr. Thaya, how about you?
What I look at, if it is at the supermarket, the label is very, very important, because it will tell me where this meat is coming from, and also does it have is it giving me the information that I need to know. But if I'm buying at a butchery, particularly I look at the hygiene of that place. You know, where people are handling meat and money at the same time, usually, and I tell my butchers that no, you don't handle, either you wash your hands and you're handling meat, because that is a big problem. So I look at the hygiene of the place, the equipment that is being used at the butchery. You know, we have many butcheries where the same cloth that is used to wipe the weighing scale is put somewhere. You put matumbo and then you put liver on the same scale. So these are some of the things I look at. But I'm not, I don't eat meat a lot, so in as much as I control.
All right. Jim, I mean, I can ask you that you buy chicken. I guess obviously not. It must be a pack that comes with the job. But, you know, if you were to, what would you look for?
Thank you, Olive. Of course, I do eat quite a lot of chicken. It's one of my favourites, and I do buy Kenchick. But if I sort of take myself outside of that scope, and I do obviously not always get it straight from the business, and I do shop in supermarkets. In fact, I'm a big foodie, so I love to shop and I love to look at produce and see how it's displayed, etc. I will concur with everything. I think if you know the producer, or sorry, the retailer, and you're going to have a conversation, you can very quickly pick up from the person who is serving you and how they're preparing the meat, how it is actually visually displayed, and have a good conversation. You will very quickly understand that they understand how good food is prepared, produced, etc. And I will glean and gain that confidence in those areas. Looking at meat straight away, you can tell if it's fresh. You can have very quick, if there's blemishes on it, you can understand what the slaughtering process was like or how it was handled prior to any slaughter. There's a whole load of giveaway details which will clearly say, I can trust this food. You know, if you take, for instance, beef today, I know within Kenya, everybody likes to see very bright red beef, and that's a sign of freshness. Actually, a darker toned meat, which has had some time to chill and sensitize, the enzymes working on it, is actually a much better product than the very fresh, red-looking meat. But to put it mildly, I will assess the whole environment, talk with the butcher, talk with the person serving me, and make my informed decision. I think it's also interesting to say that we have witnessed, and I witnessed from afar, and Dr. Theo just alluded to it, that, you know, the mixing and touching of other products on a butchery counter, where you might know the provenance maybe of the beef or the chicken, but only one, and then they're happily touching various surfaces, not cleaning them down, etc. We can have a great product, we can get it to the retail level, and then the blemishes and the issues can occur. So take in the whole environment, really ask the right questions, and I think you need then to make your decision, and an informed decision.
All right. Dr. Thaya, what happens then? Jim has, you know, sort of highlighted some of the things that would indicate that meat is off, including, he said, blemishes. What happens when we find in the market that indeed a product is unsafe for consumption? Is there a recall? With whom does that responsibility fall?
Responsibility for food safety will primarily fall on the person who is owning that product. We call them the food business operators. So because I'm the one who is selling this meat, it should be my responsibility to ensure that I'm giving my customers safe food. But seeing the situation as we have, the customer also becomes their responsibility, that I should demand for safe food. I should demand for clean food. Like what Victor had said earlier, you can tell your butcher, I'm not buying this meat if this, I'll go to another butchery if this and this is not happening. But our economy sometimes does not allow for that, because food safety costs. And sometimes it's not the willingness to pay for safe food, but also the ability to pay for safe food. So this is an issue. But the government also plays a key role. We have the Ministry of Health, which is charged with the responsibility of looking at all food handling premises and ensure that the standards that have been set for food safety are met, are complied with, and if they are not complied with, penalties are there. So the ministry is there, both at the county level, the county health offices, and at the national level. They are there to ensure that the food business operators, whose primary responsibility to offer safe food, are complying. It is not the government, because the government is not the one who owns the meat, but the government verifies and should penalize any food business operator who is not doing the right thing. But I will also throw it to me and you, Olive, as the customers and the consumers, to ensure that we are getting value for our money, we are getting value for the service. If I'm paying to get food, let me get clean food, and not just meat. Even when I go to the market there, when I buy tomatoes that are sold next to a sewer, it is me who is buying. So we should all ensure that you look at the environment where you are buying the food, you look at the people who are selling to you the food, you look at the food itself, is it rotting, is it blemished? Does it look suspicious? There has been a lot of talk about food with flies is good, but food with flies shows the dirty environment. And food, every food, particularly food of animal origin, is very good food for the bacteria. It's very good food for the flies, and these flies will come from the toilet and land on the meat. So when we say that we buy meat because it has flies, what else are we buying with it? But then the good thing with our consumption patterns is that most of us cook food thoroughly. So that may reduce, not entirely eliminate, but may reduce the risks of those food contamination of the food. But again, when you cook, what do? Do you eat with dirty hands or dirty utensils? So it's as Victor said, it's the whole chain.
Okay, so I know, Victor, you're the farming campaigns manager, but based on what I'm gathering from all of you, it's not just enough to say Serikal, not just enough to look at the farmer. The retail chain matters. The consumer also has a responsibility. Is it true, Victor?
Yeah, it is. I think we need to make informed buying decisions. And informed buying decisions means you interrogate the system. If I'm going to buy, and usually, early in the morning, I was telling a group of farmers, how comes you accept certain things when it comes to chickens? And if I was to sell you a shirt without one button, you quickly raise issues because you want the buttons all to be there. But a chicken with a blind eye, you will take. Same process. If you're going to be a good consumer, you need to have a relationship. And I think one of the things people don't appreciate is that sales is a relational sort of thing. Yeah, I buy because you've gained my confidence. I am sure that your system works. I can interrogate it. So I think the consumer needs to start interrogating the food system at a certain level. And to give you an example, we did a CAP survey, knowledge, attitude and practice survey, I think 2 or 3 years back across Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania and Zambia. And one of the questions we asked was, whom do you trust in terms of food business? And where do you purchase your foods from? In terms of whom we least trusted, the least trusted individual in the food chain is government. And that is understandable. Joyce knows people don't trust government in anything. They say something, you quickly disown that. The second least trusted person is the butchery. But interestingly, 75% of consumers in Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania, and Zambia buy their meat from a butchery. So we are saying we are buying products that has impact on our health from a source that we least trust. And that to me is an oxymoron. All right.
Jim, as we begin to wind down, and I'd like to invite Victor and Dr. Thaya to think about their calls to action. Jim, what opportunities do you think there are to collaborate in the interest of food safety?
Huge, absolutely huge. You know, I've been in the industry here in Kenchik for 16 years. I came from an agri background overseas where huge, strong collaboration between private, i.e. producers, government and other organisations really formed the food industry. Today you can see very well good structures where they all work together, farmers, processors like ourselves, government, working farm bodies have come together to engage government, get funding from government, and being able to really, really push the agenda. I just see this massive opportunity here. Kenchik are very well, and I think the industry and the poultry industry are very much there to support, help, drive, use our skills, knowledge, etc. to help train up vets, food safety, health standards, and take the great opportunity to produce a great product, which I know Kenya can do. And I think just going back to what we just said there before, I implore the consumer to put pressure on producers, on retailers, on government as well, to demand more knowledge on how food is produced. It is so important. You have the right, we have the right as consumers to understand and know exactly where our food came from, and that it's fit and safe for consumption.
All right. Dr. Thaya, if, say, somebody was in the kitchen frying up some chicken and was only half listening to this conversation, what message would you like to leave them with?
That person who is in the kitchen, I would like to leave them with this message. that it is their responsibility to ensure that they eat safe food and they cook it safe, they handle it safe. So one, source your food from a safe place. A clean place, if it is that tomato, if it is that meat, source it from a clean place. When you get it home, the services that you are using it on, the equipment that you are using, you should make sure that they are clean. The water that you are using, you should ensure that this water is also safe. Also, when you use your equipment, do not mix the raw food and the cooked food. You are doing your salad and you are cutting your meat and you are using the same chopping board, so you do not mix. Cook food thoroughly. That is the other thing. Make sure that your food is cooked well. And after you cook your food, make sure that you don't recontaminate it again. When you cook it and then you use a dirty plate or you use your dirty hands, when you have left your ugali on the table and then you go to the toilet and you don't wash your hands. So all what you had done in the cooking is not right. If you have to store your food, cover it up, store it in the fridge. The science has it that the safe temperatures for food is either below 4, which is the fridge, or above 60. So you eat your food hot. If you store it, because the temperatures in between are the temperatures good for the bacteria and other microorganisms that will cause us problems. So those would be the issues that I would tell that person who is in the kitchen.
Okay, I'm hearing a lot about cleanliness from all of you. Victor, how about you?
I think for me, it's just to go back to the slogan for World Food Safety Day, which was started back in 2018 by World Health Organization, but subsequently has been joined by FAO and World Organization for Animal Health. Essentially, food safety is everybody's business. It's not about Serekali's idea to do 1, 2, 3. It's about ensuring that the food, we ask the right questions, we interrogate the food system, we audit the whole process. We ask our suppliers, we look at it. A simple one, when we see chickens being transported on a motorbike or hanging on the roofs of vehicles, what do we do as consumers? What do we feel? Is it just that attitude that anyway it's not going to end up on my table? Who knows? That chicken might actually ultimately end up on your table. So I think for me it's just learning. My challenge is to consumers: learn, ask the hard questions, push retailers, push your supplier to do the right thing, because then the supplier pushes the producer, and ultimately then you have a relatively safe environment. Ask government to do the right thing. I see, and you alluded to things like red alert that were done by this station. They are done, there's a worry and people react, then we quickly forget. We need to consistently hold government, whether it's national government, whether it's county governments, to do the right thing, to ensure the right staff are employed, to ensure that the whole value chain is looked at. So I'd like to just say food safety is everybody's business. It's not about government, it's not about producers, it's not about retailers, but all of us must work to push the safety of food to the next level.
Okay, and speaking of business and safety, food safety, I'll come to you, Jim, for the last one. What's your parting shot?
My parting shot, I concur actually with what Victor said. I would say the consumer, really push, please, ask the right questions. You have the right to great quality food, food you can trust. It puts pressure down through the system. It puts pressure from media. It will make the processors, producers like ourselves, think long and hard. The retailer to question how they're supplying their customer and their business and how they want to grow their business as well. So I think, yes, it's holistic, it's across the board, but I really think the consumer has a massive part to play and needs to constantly be educated as well about good food quality. We can do it, it's easily done, and the opportunities are immense across the whole of the food chain. So start with the consumer is mine.
All right. Thank you so very much to my panelists. So as it turns out tonight on Nation Leadership Forum, we were cuckoo about chicken. Before I bite into that, Smriti Vidyarthi will be coming up with the news up next. And budget, Manenos, I hope it does not spoil your appetite. I've been your host, Olive Burrows. With me, I've had Dr. Joyce Thaya, as well as Dr. Victor Yamo, and Jim Tozer, the Managing Director, Kenchik. Have yourself a good night.
would you do with 50 million
Kenya shillings? Kuna vitu mingi. Mimi nataka nyumba, nataka gari, all that can accommodate. Nataka ku travel, I need new things.
Lotto is now bigger and better kwa sababu you can now win yourself big amounts of money in the daily draw, the mega jackpot, and of course 100,000 Kenya shillings each and every day of the week, minus Wednesday and Saturday.
Tunasema kuwa utanuke na Lotto. What that means is right now, ukiweka ile stake yako ya 50 shillings all the way to 1,000 Kenya shillings, we multiply that by 50,000. Kama umematch all your 6 numbers. That means ukicheza for example na 1,000 shillings, unaweza kuwa multimillionaire. You can win yourself 50 million Kenya shillings, our new jackpot amount.
Swali leo ni wewe utazifanya nini na 50 million Kenya shillings? Paybill number kumbuka ni 77700. Account number ni live. Kila laheri, changamka, cheza Lotto.
Kisii, changamkeni and let's meet at Gusii Stadium from Wednesday 9th June to Friday 11th June for the IRA Open Day. The Insurance Regulatory Authority is bringing the insurance message right to your doorstep in partnership with the County Government of Kisii. Join us to learn more about insurance. IRA officers will be on site to address your needs, queries and complaints. Various companies will also be present to showcase their products and address any concerns you may have. Policyholders, beneficiaries and members of the public are all invited to attend. Entry is absolutely free. All Ministry of Health and COVID-19 protocols and guidelines